The HOA Tyrant, who thought she could destroy a federal investigator. Part 1. Barbara Mitchell thought weaponizing HOA rules against a retired federal investigator would be easy until she discovered what happens when you pick a fight with someone who spent 30 years taking down organized crime for 8 months straight. This power-hungry HOA president used every petty rule in the book to make my life miserable. Fines for my mailbox being 2 inches too tall. Citations for my grass being 1 shade too green. Complaints about my American flag being 3 inches larger than regulation. The endless certified letters with Barbara's fountain pen signature. The smug smile during monthly HOA meetings. The way she'd pause outside my house, taking photographs like she was documenting a crime scene. Every morning, watching her drive past in a Mercedes, documenting my property like some kind of suburban inspector. I tried reasoning with her. She'll find me. I tried compliance. She changed the rules overnight. I requested formal mediation. She denied it with bureaucratic efficiency. What Barbara didn't know. I'd spent 3 decades investigating federal racketeering cases, and I recognized a protection racket the moment I saw one. One strategically filed federal complaint later, Barbara's entire criminal enterprise came crashing down around her. FBI raids at dawn. Criminal charges, asset, caesura's public humiliation. But that's just the beginning of how this corrupt HOA president destroyed her entire life. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your HOA president was running a criminal organization? Drop a flag emoji below and let me know where you're watching from. I'm Robert Chun, 62 years old, retired senior special agent from the Federal Trade Commission. I spent 35 years investigating complex fraud schemes, mortgage scams, and organized corruption networks. My specialty was building ironclad cases that sent white-collar criminals to federal prison where they belonged. Pattern recognition became second nature. Document analysis was my art form. Following money trails that criminals thought they'd hidden perfectly was my superpower. Most importantly, over those 3.5 decades, I learned that the biggest fraudsters often hide in plain sight, wearing respectable masks and expensive suits while running criminal enterprises from positions of trust and authority. Linda and I bought our dream home in Riverside Meadows in March 2020. 20 to 100 square feet of craftsman-style perfection on a corner lot with mature oak trees that provided shade and character. The neighborhood looked absolutely ideal from the outside. Well-maintained homes painted in approved colors. Friendly neighbors who waved from their manicured lawns. Reasonable HOA fees of $175 monthly that seemed fair for what we were getting. The sales agent spent 30 minutes assuring us the HOA was professional, fair-minded, and only interested in maintaining property values. What she conveniently didn't mention was Barbara Mitchell. Barbara Mitchell was 54 years old with a kind of rigid military posture that suggested she'd swallowed a ruler sometime in the 1980s and never fully recovered. She'd been HOA president for 6 consecutive years, running, which should have been my first major warning sign, but I'd ignored in my retirement optimism. Her perfectly styled silver hair never had a strand out of place. Her designer pantsuits probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. She drove a pearl white Mercedes S-Class with a license plate Prez 1 because subtlety was apparently against her religion. She lived in the neighborhood's largest home, a sprawling 5,000-square-foot Mediterranean monstrosity that violated at least 12 different HOA regulations that somehow never applied to her special situation. The first sign of real trouble arrived exactly 3 weeks after we moved in. A certified letter in a heavy cream envelope with the Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead embossed at the top. Professional formatting that screamed expensive attorney, legal terminology designed to intimidate. Barbara Mitchell's signature in distinctive blue fountain pen ink at the bottom. Dear Mr. Chun, it has come to our attention that your mailbox post exceeds HOA regulation height by 2 inches. Per section 12.3 of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. All mailbox posts must not exceed 42 inches from ground level to the bottom of the mailbox housing. Your current installation measures 44 inches. You have 14 calendar days to remedy this violation or face fines of $50 per day until compliance is achieved. I measured my mailbox post with the same precision I'd brought to federal investigations my entire career. 42 inches exactly. Not 44 inches, not even 42¼ inches. The professional post installer had used a laser level and followed the HOA specifications to the absolute millimeter. But when I called Barbara Mitchell directly to discuss this obvious measurement discrepancy, her response revealed absolutely everything I needed to know about how she operated her little kingdom. Mr. Chun, I measured it myself with my own tape measure, Barbara said, her voice carrying the special kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. Perhaps you're not familiar with proper measuring techniques, since you're new to the neighborhood. I've been HOA president for 6 years. I think I know how to read a tape measure correctly. That metallic taste of recognition filled my mouth. This wasn't actually about mailbox heights at all. This was about power, dynamics, and control. Barbara Mitchell had found a system she could manipulate and weaponize, and she was using it to establish dominance over anyone who might potentially challenge her authority structure. But I didn't argue with her over the phone. Instead, I did exactly what 35 years of federal investigation had taught me to do. I started documenting absolutely everything with the same meticulous precision that had built cases against organized crime figures, digital photographs with embedded timestamps, and location data, certified letter receipts filed chronologically, measurement documentation with independent witnesses present, video recordings of every single HOA meeting, a detailed Excel spreadsheet tracking violations, fines, and patterns across the entire neighborhood that would make any federal prosecutor weep with joy. Week 2 brought citation number 2 through my mail slot. My front lawn was allegedly one shade too vibrant green, suggesting excessive fertilization that could potentially contaminate groundwater supplies. The fine was $75, with escalating daily penalties of $25 until the grass returned to approved color standards. Linda stood at our kitchen window watching me measure grass color with a professional spectrometer I'd borrowed from my old colleague at the Environmental Protection Agency. "This is absolutely insane," Linda said, the morning sun highlighting new worry lines that definitely hadn't been there when we first moved in. "She's targeting us specifically and personally. The Hendersons 3 houses down have grass that's literally twice as green as ours, and nobody's bothering them about anything." Linda was absolutely right, because I'd already documented the Henderson lawn along with literally every other property in Riverside Meadows. My investigation instincts had kicked in automatically. The patterns were already emerging clear as day. Barbara filed selective citations against 11 specific households, while completely ignoring dozens of equivalent, or actually worse, violations from her political allies and supporters. Citation number 3 arrived in May. My American flag allegedly exceeded HOA approved dimensions by 3 inches on the fly edge. According to Barbara's creative interpretation of Section 19.7, residential flags could not exceed 3 feet by 5 feet maximum dimensions. My flag measured 3 feet 2 inches by 5 feet 3 inches. The fine was $100, with escalating daily penalties that would bankrupt most families. This particular violation revealed Barbara's first major tactical error. Federal law specifically protects the right to display the American flag on residential property. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 prohibits homeowner association regulations that would restrict flag display beyond reasonable restrictions on time, place, and manner of display. Barbara Mitchell had just exposed herself to potential federal civil rights violations that carried serious criminal penalties. But I wasn't ready to play that particular card yet. 35 years of investigating complex fraud operations had taught me infinite patience. You don't arrest the street-level dealer when you're methodically building cases against the cartel boss and their entire organization. You watch carefully, document meticulously, and wait patiently for the behavioral patterns to reveal the entire criminal enterprise structure. The monthly HOA meeting in June 2023 was my first real look at Barbara's full operation in action. 73 residents packed into the community center, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. The smell of terrible coffee and bureaucratic frustration hung heavy in the air. Barbara Mitchell presided from the head table like a queen holding court, with her 2 loyal board members flanking her like palace guards. Michael Torres, treasurer, 61 years old, with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was involved in something deeply wrong. Patricia Wohl, secretary, 57 years old, with the blank expression of willful ignorance and deliberate denial. "First order of business tonight," Barbara announced, her voice carrying practiced authority across the assembled crowd. "We'll hear the monthly financial report from our esteemed treasurer, Michael Torres." Michael shuffled papers with visibly trembling hands, his voice barely audible beyond the first row. "Current HOA account balance stands at $47,200. Monthly income from dues is approximately $8,500 from our 118 paying households. Monthly operating expenses average $6,200. My investigator brain immediately flagged the mathematical discrepancy like a flashing red alarm. If monthly income exceeded monthly expenses by $2,300, the annual surplus should be approximately $27,600. Yet the total balance was only $47,000. Either the HOA had recently made some major undisclosed expenditures, or significant money was systematically disappearing through channels Michael definitely wasn't discussing publicly. "Any questions about the financial report?" Barbara asked, with the hopeful tone of someone who desperately prayed nobody had questions. I raised my hand with the casual confidence of someone who'd interrogated organized crime figures in federal courtrooms. "Could we perhaps see a detailed, itemized breakdown of the $6,200 in monthly expenses, and maybe a 3-year historical comparison showing how that current balance accumulated over time?" The silence that followed felt colder than Barbara's fake smile. "Mr. Chun, detailed financial records are available for individual review, by appointment only. This monthly meeting is specifically for summary reports only. If you'd like to schedule a comprehensive records review, you may contact me directly after the meeting concludes." Translation clear as crystal. She had absolutely no intention of ever letting anyone examine those records closely. The meeting continued with Barbara announcing ambitious new enforcement initiatives, even stricter mailbox regulations with additional height restrictions, updated landscape requirements with approved plant species lists, revised parking restrictions prohibiting overnight street parking. Each new rule came with substantial fines and escalating penalties, giving Barbara even more tools for punishing anyone who dared challenge her authority structure. After the meeting officially adjourned, I approached 3 neighbors who'd been taking notes with the same intensity I'd observed during federal grand jury proceedings. Martha Patterson, 71 years old, with the sharp observant eyes of a career librarian. James Morrison, 48 years old, software engineer with analytical skills written all over his frustrated expression. Susan Rodriguez, 39 years old, single mother of 2 beautiful children with the exhausted determination of someone fighting multiple battles simultaneously. "She's been doing exactly this for 6 solid years," Martha whispered urgently, glancing around nervously to make absolutely sure Barbara wasn't within listening distance. "Started relatively small with just petty enforcement actions, gradually expanded her power base until she basically runs this entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Anyone who complains or questions her decisions gets systematically targeted with violations until they either comply completely or move away defeated." James pulled out his tablet displaying spreadsheet data that made my investigator heart sing with joy. "I've been meticulously tracking citation patterns for the past 18 months. 11 specific households receive 87% of all violations issued. Those exact same 11 households previously filed formal complaints against Barbara's selective enforcement practices. The statistical correlation is mathematically impossible to attribute to pure coincidence." Susan Rodriguez's contribution was even more personally damning. She directly threatened to foreclose on my house over accumulated unpaid fines, told me explicitly that if I couldn't afford her penalties, maybe I couldn't afford to live in Riverside Meadows at all. "I'm a pediatric nurse, working double shifts to support my kids after my divorce. Barbara's manufactured fines currently totaled over $3,000 for violations like my trash can being visible from the street for 6 hours on a non-collection day." This clearly wasn't just typical petty HOA tyranny anymore. This was systematic harassment, and intimidation with patterns strongly suggesting organized criminal activity operating under the guise of neighborhood governance. But I definitely needed more concrete evidence before involving federal authorities. You don't build cases that destroy someone's entire life based on assumptions and angry neighbor complaints. You build them methodically with documented facts that would survive intense scrutiny from aggressive defense attorneys and skeptical federal judges. That night, I opened a brand new investigation file on my encrypted laptop computer. Subject: Barbara Mitchell. Potential violations: racketeering under RICO statutes, systematic fraud, embezzlement of community funds, civil rights violations under color of authority, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights. The familiar, comfortable rhythm of case building immediately calmed my righteous rage and focused my investigative energy. After 35 years of systematically taking down criminals who genuinely thought they were completely untouchable, I knew exactly how to completely dismantle Barbara Mitchell's corrupt empire. What Barbara absolutely didn't know yet was that she'd just declared total war on someone who'd spent decades perfecting the precise art of destroying people who abuse positions of trust and authority. And unlike all the frightened neighbors, she'd been successfully bullying for 6 long years. I possessed resources and capabilities she couldn't possibly imagine in her worst nightmares. The Workshop War: How HOA President Barbara Mitchell learned that mechanics know exactly how deep corruption goes. Part 2: Barbara's promise of painful lessons wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of total war. And like most desperate people backed into a corner by evidence they can't refute, she was about to make the kind of mistakes that turn HOA disputes into federal cases. What Barbara didn't understand about engineers is that we're trained to anticipate failure modes. Every system has a breaking point, and I was about to apply 43 years of stress testing expertise to her entire operation. The morning after the disastrous HOA hearing, I woke to find my mailbox had been ripped from its concrete foundation and thrown into my front yard. The metallic post bent at 90 degrees, mail scattered across my lawn like confetti after a violent celebration. My security cameras captured everything in high-definition detail. To 17 a.m., a champagne-colored Lexus RX 350 with license plate Hoken pulled up. Barbara Mitchell emerged wearing black yoga pants and a dark hoodie like some suburban ninja. The footage showed her struggling with a crowbar for nearly 4 minutes. Her expensive athletic wear completely inappropriate for felony property destruction, the satisfying crunch of metal against concrete, her muttered curses, even the moment she realized she'd left her crowbar behind and had to return for it. I called the sheriff's office at 7:30 a.m. with the same calm precision I'd used reporting spacecraft component failures. Deputy Marcus Williams arrived 40 minutes later, his patrol car's radio crackling with morning dispatch. The smell of fresh coffee from his travel mug mixed with the scent of my destroyed lawn as he examined the evidence. "Mr. Anderson, this is pretty clear-cut vandalism. We'll need your security footage." I handed him a USB drive I'd prepared with 3 camera angles, timestamp synchronized, and a written summary formatted like an engineering incident report. My NASA training had taught me that documentation quality determines investigation outcomes. Deputy Williams watched the footage on his laptop, his expression shifting from professional interest to barely contained disbelief. "Is that Barbara Mitchell, the HOA president?" "Yes, sir. That's her vehicle, her license plate, and her face in clear view." Deputy Williams' radio crackled with traffic. "Sir, I need to ask, have you been having ongoing disputes with Mrs. Mitchell?" I pulled out my 3-earring binder, now expanded to include last night's HOA hearing documentation. "Deputy, I've been documenting 6 months of escalating harassment, including violation notices for legally protected structures, unauthorized property inspections, threats of legal action, and systematic targeting of long-term residents. This mailbox destruction is just the latest escalation." Deputy Williams looked at my binder like it was evidence from a major crime scene. "Most folks just call us and complain. You've got, what, 200 pages here? 247 pages, cross-referenced and indexed. I am an aerospace engineer. Documentation is my native language." He smiled. "Mr. Anderson, I think you might want to file for a restraining order. That afternoon, I drove to County Court Administration with the same methodical approach I'd brought to every critical project. The building smelled like floor wax and legal documents. Filing a restraining order requires specific evidence of threats, harassment patterns, and legitimate fear of harm. My engineering documentation made the court clerk's eyes widen. "Sir, I've been processing these applications for 16 years. This is the most thoroughly documented petition I've ever seen." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, but Barbara's next move came much sooner. Friday morning, I'm in my workshop machining a custom part when I hear heavy equipment approaching, the diesel rumble of something big, something municipal, something very wrong. I stepped outside to find a code enforcement truck parked in my driveway. Dave Morrison, the senior code inspector, approached with a clipboard and fake sympathy. "Anderson, we received reports of hazardous materials storage, unpermitted electrical modifications, and potential zoning violations at this location. The metallic taste of corruption replaced my morning coffee." "Reports from whom?" "Anonymous citizen complaint. I'm authorized to conduct an immediate safety inspection." Here's where my aerospace background saved me. Decades of surprise NASA inspections had taught me that legitimate safety concerns require specific protocols. "Dave, what's the nature of the immediate danger that bypasses standard notification requirements?" He stuttered. "Well, the complaint mentioned chemical storage that could pose environmental risks." I pulled out my phone and opened my digital filing system. "Dave, I maintain material safety data sheets for every chemical in my workshop, updated quarterly and available for inspection with 24 hours notice, as required by county code. Would you like me to email those to your office, or schedule a proper inspection with appropriate notice?" The pause was longer than a satellite signal delay. His radio crackled with emergency traffic. "I'll need to respond to this call. I'll contact you about rescheduling." The relief in his voice was audible as he backed out faster than Barbara's mailbox destruction getaway. But I wasn't satisfied with just defending. That evening, I filed a formal complaint against Dave Morrison for attempted illegal search and harassment under color of authority. The restraining order hearing Tuesday morning felt like a NASA mission review board. The courtroom smelled like old wood and legal consequence, with morning sunlight streaming through high windows. Barbara arrived with her husband Gerald and attorney Richard Penn, whose expensive suit couldn't hide the fact his client was caught on camera committing felonies. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed my evidence binder with methodical attention. "Mr. Anderson, this documentation is extraordinarily thorough. Mrs. Mitchell, do you dispute any of these incidents?" Barbara stood with indignant posture. "Your Honor, Mr. Anderson has been systematically violating HOA regulations, and when I attempted to enforce community standards through proper channels, he responded with this harassment campaign." The judge's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm looking at security footage of you destroying Mr. Anderson's mailbox at 2:17 a.m. while wearing what appears to be a disguise. How does that constitute proper channels?" "That was clearly a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I was checking neighborhood properties for violation concerns and accidentally damaged his mailbox while inspecting the installation. Accidentally." The judge's tone could have frozen hydraulic fluid. "With the crowbar that you brought specifically for this inspection." Gerald Mitchell leaned over to whisper urgently in Barbara's ear, but she shrugged him off with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. "Your Honor, Mr. Anderson has been refusing to pay HOA dues for 19 years. This restraining order request is just his latest attempt to avoid accountability." Judge Morrison held up one hand for silence. "Mrs. Mitchell, this hearing is not about HOA disputes. This hearing is about whether you pose a credible threat to Mr. Anderson's safety. The evidence includes vandalism captured on cameras, threats witnessed by multiple residents, unauthorized property inspections, and harassment through improper code enforcement channels. Do you have any evidence to contradict these allegations?" Barbara's response was pure, entitled fury. "He's a vindictive old man trying to destroy my reputation because I refused to let him turn our neighborhood into an industrial zone." The judge looked at me with sympathy. "Mr. Anderson, can you demonstrate a pattern of escalating behavior? I stood with calm precision. Your Honor, I've documented 6 months of escalating harassment beginning with violation notices for legally protected structures, proceeding through unauthorized inspections and threats, escalating to vandalism and improper code enforcement. Each incident represents escalation in severity. Furthermore, I've discovered through public records that Mrs. Mitchell has similar complaint patterns against 17 other residents over 6 years. The judge's gavel came down with legal authority. Restraining order granted. Mrs. Mitchell, you are prohibited from contact with Mr. Anderson, from approaching within 500 feet of his property, from filing any HOA actions against his property without board majority approval in writing, and from any form of retaliation. Violations will result in immediate arrest. Furter more. Furter more. I'm forwarding this case file to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges related to the mailbox vandalism. Barbara's face cycled through more emotions than a pressure test on faulty seals. But Your Honor, I'm HOA President. My duties require contact with all residents. The judge's expression could have frozen rocket fuel. Then I suggest you resign from that position, Mrs. Mitchell. This order is effective immediately. Walking out of that courtroom felt like mission success after a critical launch. But Barbara's humiliation wasn't the end of her nightmare. It was the catalyst that would expose corruption running deeper than anyone imagined. That evening, I received a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Anderson, this is Jennifer Cole from the HOA board. I need to talk to you about what we've discovered in the financial records. Can we meet somewhere private? The urgency in her voice triggered my engineering instincts. We met at Tony's Coffee House, a local shop that smelled like roasted beans and community gossip. Jennifer arrived carrying a laptop and the haunted expression of someone who'd discovered their trusted system was fundamentally flawed. Bob, I've been doing the annual financial review as treasurer, and I found something that doesn't make sense. She opened a spreadsheet that looked like chaos masquerading as accounting. Over the past 6 years, Barbara has authorized $83,000 in legal fees paid to her husband Gerald's law firm for HOA matters. But when I cross-referenced with actual legal services, I can only find documentation for about $12,000 worth of actual work. The metallic taste of corruption intensified. That's $71,000 unaccounted for. Jennifer nodded grimly. It hits worse. Barbara has been approving violation fines against residents, but the money collected doesn't match the deposits in our HOA account. I'm missing approximately $38,000 in collected fines over 4 years. My aerospace training kicked into overdrive. Jennifer, what about contractor payments for neighborhood maintenance? Her hands trembled. That's what terrified me. Barbara has authorized $217,000 to Riverside Property Services over 5 years. But when I contacted our actual service providers, their invoices only total about $94,000. The mathematical precision of the fraud was almost impressive. Barbara and Gerald had been systematically looting the HOA for years, covering their tracks with intimidation tactics. But they'd made one critical engineering error. They'd picked a fight with someone trained to find hidden failures in complex systems. I pulled out my phone and called attorney Sarah Kim. Sarah, I need someone who specializes in HOA fraud and embezzlement cases. I think we've just discovered a criminal enterprise disguised as neighborhood management. Within 48 hours, Sarah had assembled the dream team. Forensic accountant Marcus Webb, former FBI investigator Patricia Rodriguez, and real estate attorney David Chun. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and righteous anger as we spread Jennifer's evidence across a mahogany table. Marcus Webb examined the financial records with intensity. This is textbook embezzlement with fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of fiduciary duty. We've got fake vendor invoices, unauthorized legal fee payments, missing fine collections, and systematic theft of approximately $347,000 over 6 years. His laser pointer traced the money trail. Barbara approves payment to Riverside Property Services. That's a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. The actual provider is Green Valley Landscaping, who confirms they've only been paid about 43% of what the HOA authorized. Someone's intercepting the difference. Patricia Rodriguez leaned forward with predatory focus. The Delaware Shell Company is registered to Gerald Mitchell using his law firm's address. This is sophisticated financial crime with multiple layers of concealment. David Chun added the legal hammer. HOA fraud cases like this almost always involve municipal corruption. Someone at the county level has been helping them avoid oversight. I'd bet money that your code inspector Dave Morrison has received payments or favors for harassing targeted residents. The pattern was clear as aerospace engineering blueprints. Barbara and Jarrell had built a criminal enterprise using HOA authority as cover, targeting long-term residents who remembered accountability while cultivating newer residents who voted in elections. My workshop violation wasn't about architectural harmony. It was about eliminating someone who documented everything and wasn't afraid to challenge authority. But they'd picked the wrong target. I spent that weekend compiling what would become a 412-page forensic analysis of the Mitchell criminal enterprise. Monday morning, we walked into District Attorney Margaret Foster's office carrying 3 bankers' boxers of evidence. Her office smelled like law books and coffee. Margaret had built her career on public corruption cases. "Gentlemen, lady," she said after 90 minutes, reviewing our evidence, "this is the most thoroughly documented HOA fraud case I've seen in 22 years. You've got embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering through shell companies, abuse of authority, witness intimidation, and municipal corruption involving at least one code enforcement officer. We're looking at federal charges, potentially RICO violations." The task force assembled over 10 days included FBI Financial Crimes Unit, IRA's Criminal Investigation Division, County Sheriff's Fraud Department, and State Attorney General's Public Corruption Team. The investigation moved with precision. Simultaneous search warrants executed at Barbara and Gerald's home, Gerald's law firm, the HOA management office, and Dave Morrison's residence. The local news caught footage of FBI agents carrying boxers out of the Mitchell mansion while Barbara screamed about persecution. Her perfectly styled silver hair looked distinctly less presidential under harsh television cameras. The arrest came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks later. Barbara was taken into custody at her weekly hair appointment, handcuffed in front of the same salon where she'd held court for years. Gerald was arrested at his law firm, let out past associates who'd trusted him. Dave Morrison was picked up at a construction site. The charges read like an engineering failure analysis. 23 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering, witness tampering, and abuse of authority. The bail hearing denied bail for Barbara after prosecutors presented evidence she'd attempted to contact witnesses and had transferred $87,000 offshore. That night, my phone rang with calls from 17 neighbors, all with variations of the same message. Thank God someone finally stopped her. Mrs. Pedersen called, crying with relief. "Bob, she tried to force me to tear down my gazebo last year. I spent $8,000 on legal fees proving she was wrong." Mr. Henderson called with rage. "That woman filed fake code violations against us 4 times. Cost us over $12,000. The Martinez family stopped by with homemade tamales. She tried to fine us for speaking Spanish too loudly in our own backyard." Each story added another layer to Barbara's pattern of systematic abuse. She'd terrorized an entire community, using HOA authority as a weapon. But she'd made one fatal engineering mistake. She'd attacked someone trained to document failures, analyze systems, and build cases with mathematical precision. Standing in my workshop that evening, surrounded by 41 years of tools and memories, I understood something profound. This wasn't about property rights anymore. This was about justice for an entire community that had suffered in silence. Barbara Mitchell was about to learn that eventually every system's weaknesses get exposed. And when you build your empire on fraud and corruption, the collapse is catastrophic and permanent. The workshop wore. How HOA President Barbara Mitchell learned that mechanics know exactly how deep corruption goes. Part 3. The preliminary hearing 3 weeks after Barbara's arrest felt like watching a spacecraft disintegrate during every structural weakness exposed under pressure, every hidden flaw revealed in catastrophic detail. The federal courthouse smelled like polished marble and constitutional authority. I sat in the gallery with 17 other Riverside Meadows residents who'd been victimized by Barbara's regime, watching justice unfold with engineering precision. Barbara entered the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit that contrasted sharply with her usual designer wardrobe. Her silver hair, once styled like broadcast perfection, now hung limp and unwashed. 3 weeks in county detention had stripped away the veneer of suburban royalty, revealing the desperate criminal underneath. Gerald sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide his defeat. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Martinez, approached the bench with 3 bankers' boxers of evidence. Your Honor, the government will demonstrate that the defendants operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise using HOA authority to embezzle $347,000 over 6 years, intimidate witnesses, falsify financial records, and corrupt municipal code enforcement. Judge William Patterson, a former corporate fraud prosecutor with 40 years on the bench, reviewed the indictment with methodical attention. Mr. Martinez, this is an extraordinary case. 23 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering, witness tampering, and abuse of authority. I assume you have evidence to support these charges? Your Honor, the government has 412 pages of forensic accounting analysis prepared by the defendant's own victims, security camera footage of criminal acts, testimony from 17 defrauded homeowners, bank records showing systematic theft, and recordings of threats made to witnesses. The defense attorney, Marcus Sullivan, stood with desperate energy. Your Honor, my clients are pillars of their community who've dedicated years to neighborhood improvement. These charges represent a vindictive campaign by a disgruntled resident. The prosecutor's smile could have cut steel. Your Honor, may I present? Exhibit a video screen descended showing security footage of Barbara destroying my mailbox at 2:17 a.m. The courtroom gasped as Barbara's face appeared in crystal-clear detail, struggling with a crowbar while wearing her suburban ninja disguise. This pillar of the community committed felony vandalism when her victim presented evidence of her corruption. The defense attorney went pale. That's clearly a misunderstanding of Mrs. Mitchell's intentions. Judge Patterson's expression could have flash-frozen hydraulic fluid. Mr. Sullivan, are you seriously arguing that vandalism with a crowbar at 2 a.m. constitutes legitimate HOA business? Perhaps we could discuss a plea arrangement. Your Honor. The judge's gavel came down. Defendants remanded to custody. Bail denied. Trial date set for 90 days from today. Barbara's scream echoed through the courthouse. You're all making a terrible mistake. I was protecting property values. Walking out of that courthouse, surrounded by neighbors who'd suffered under Barbara's tyranny, felt like mission success. Mrs. Pedersen grabbed my arm. Bob, I want to testify. I have documentation of every interaction with Barbara over 6 years. Mr. Henderson pulled out his phone showing spreadsheets tracking over $12,000 in legal fees. I'm testifying too. My marriage nearly ended because of the stress she caused. That evening, 23 Riverside Meadows residents gathered in the Martinez living room. The atmosphere crackled with righteous anger, finally given permission to exist. For 6 years, Barbara had isolated victims, making each person think they were alone. Now we understood the systematic nature of her operation. Jennifer Cole presented her complete analysis. Over 6 years, Barbara and Jera created a multi-layered embezzlement scheme. They established Riverside Property Services as a shell company in Delaware, approved inflated contracts through the HOA board, then pocketed the difference. Total theft from fake vendor invoices, $194,000. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. But what about the legal fees? Gerald's law firm charged the HOA $83,000 for services over 6 years, but actual documented legal work only totals about $12,000. Jennifer nodded grimly. That's theft through professional services fraud. Gerald would bill the HOA for 10 hours of legal research, but his firm's internal time records show only 2 hours were actually worked. Thomas Wright added his analysis. I've examined the violation fine collection records. Barbara issued 317 fines, totaling approximately $62,000, but HOA bank deposits only show about $24,000. Where's the other $38,000? The answer came from Dave Morrison's plea agreement. Dave had been collecting violation fines in cash from desperate homeowners, then splitting the money with Barbara. Classic municipal corruption. But the most disturbing revelation came from Michael Torres, a property inspector. I quit 2 years ago because Barbara was running a protection racket. She'd identified properties with minor code issues, threatened massive fines. Then Gerald would offer to fix the problems through his construction contacts for inflated prices. If you refused, Barbara would escalate until you either paid or sold. Jennifer pulled up another spreadsheet showing property turnover. 43 homes sold under distress conditions after prolonged HOA disputes. The pattern is clear. Barbara targets long-term residents with manufactured violations. Gerald provides expensive legal defense, and if victims can't pay, they're forced to sell. Several properties were purchased by shell companies connected to Gerald's law firm, renovated cheaply, then resold at profit. The scheme wasn't just embezzlement. It was systematic property theft disguised as HOA enforcement. I pulled out my engineering notebooks and started creating a timeline on the whiteboard. When you design fail-safe systems, you learn to identify common cause failures. Barbara's operation had multiple failure points. But the common cause was unchecked authority combined with victim isolation. Over 3 hours, we documented every violation notice, every threatening call, every improper inspection, every inflated legal bill. By midnight, we'd compiled a victim impact database that would make the prosecution's case irrefutable. The trial began on a Monday morning in early November. The federal courthouse courtroom was packed with victims, journalists, and curious residents. I sat in the front row. My 412-page forensic analysis entered as Government Exhibit 1. Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez delivered his opening statement with precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next 2 weeks you will hear evidence of a criminal conspiracy that operated for 6 years under Suburban Homeowner Association cover. You will see bank records showing systematic theft. You will hear testimony from 17 victims who were intimidated and financially ruined. You will watch security footage of crimes committed by people who believed their positions made them immune to consequences. The defense attorney tried to paint Barbara as a dedicated volunteer, overwhelmed by complex financial systems, but his argument crumbled when Martinez presented FBI forensic accountant Linda Chun. The numbers tell a story of deliberate, systematic theft. Riverside Property Services received $217,000 in approved HOA payments, but the actual service providers only received about $94,000. The difference was transferred to accounts controlled by Gerald Mitchell's law firm, then dispersed through shell accounts. The defense attorney attempted damage control. Isn't it possible these were accounting errors? Linda's response was devastating. Sir, accounting errors don't create Delaware shell companies. Accounting errors don't split payments between legitimate vendors and personal accounts. Accounting errors don't involve structured deposits under $10,000 to avoid banking reporting requirements. This is sophisticated money laundering. Day 2 brought victim testimony that painted Barbara's reign in human terms. Mrs. Pattison testified about 6 years of harassment over her gazebo. She would drive by my house 3 times a day, creating constant surveillance. I'm 78 years old. I've lived here 42 years. I helped build the community center where she held her meetings, and she treated me like a criminal. I spent $8,000 in legal fees, proving my structure was legal. $8,000 on a fixed retirement income meant choosing between fighting her or eating properly. The Martinez family testified about Barbara's campaign against their Spanish-language gatherings. She filed noise complaints every time we had family over, claiming our cultural celebrations disturbed neighborhood tranquility. She told my children they were making residents uncomfortable by speaking Spanish in our own backyard. Barbara made us feel like foreigners in our own home. Mr. Henderson described how Barbara's violations nearly destroyed his marriage, the stress of fighting her, the legal costs, the constant fear consumed our lives. My wife and I fought constantly about money. Our kids heard us arguing about whether we could afford to keep living here. Barbara didn't just steal money, she stole our peace, our security, our sense of belonging. Then came my testimony. The prosecutor guided me through my documentation with surgical precision. Mr. Anderson, can you explain how your aerospace engineering background influenced your response? In spacecraft design, we learn that documentation saves lives. Every component is tracked, every failure analyzed. When Barbara targeted my workshop, I applied the same systematic documentation to her enforcement patterns. Over 6 months, I recorded every violation notice, every threat, every improper inspection. What I discovered was a pattern consistent with systematic abuse of authority for personal financial gain. The prosecutor presented my 412-page analysis. And what did this reveal? It revealed that Barbara Mitchell targeted long-term residents who might question her authority. It revealed that violation notices correlated with property owners who had significant home equity. It revealed that Barbara's enforcement was selective, punishing those who challenged her while ignoring violations by political allies. It revealed a financial trail showing systematic embezzlement disguised as community improvement. The defense attorney's cross-examination was desperate. Mr. Anderson, isn't it true that you refused to pay HOA dues for 19 years? Yes, because I formally disputed the HOA's authority over pre-existing properties, and that dispute was never legally resolved. Isn't it true that your workshop violates current architectural standards? No, it's explicitly protected by grandfather clause provisions in the original HOA bylaws, which Barbara chose to ignore. Isn't it possible you've constructed this conspiracy theory because you don't like being told what to do? I held up my documentation. Sir, these aren't theories. These are bank records, security camera footage, testimony from 17 victims, and forensic accounting analysis. This is evidence, not opinion. Engineers deal in evidence. The prosecution's final witness was Jennifer Cole. As HOA treasurer, I trusted Barbara completely. She'd been president for 6 years. She seemed dedicated. When I started the annual financial review, I expected everything in order. Instead, I found a nightmare. Jennifer walked the jury through spreadsheet after spreadsheet showing systematic theft. Every line item told a story of betrayal, inflated legal fees, fake vendor invoices, missing fine collections. By the time I realized the scope of the fraud, I understood that speaking up might make me Barbara's next target. But I couldn't stay silent while she destroyed our community. The jury deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days. Wednesday afternoon, the bailiff announced they'd reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. On count 1, wire fraud, we find the defendant Barbara Mitchell guilty. On count 2, embezzlement, we find the defendant Barbara Mitchell guilty. The guilty verdicts continued through all 23 counts for Barbara, 18 counts for Gerald, and 12 counts for Dave Morrison. Barbara's face remained frozen in disbelief. When the final count was read, she turned to Gerald with pure venom. "This is your fault. Your greedy schemes destroyed everything." Judge Patterson scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. As marshals led Barbara away, she screamed one final threat. "You'll regret this, Anderson. You've destroyed your neighborhood." But she was wrong. Walking out, surrounded by 17 victims who'd finally received justice, I understood something profound. We hadn't destroyed our neighborhood. We'd saved it from someone who'd been destroying it for years. That evening, Riverside Meadows held an impromptu celebration in the community center. The same building where Barbara had ruled with an iron fist now hosted neighbors laughing, sharing stories, planning a real community based on cooperation rather than fear. Mrs. Patterson made her famous apple pie. The Martinez family brought tamales. Mr. Henderson brought craft beer he'd been brewing in his garage. The same garage Barbara had tried to cite 4 zoning violations. Thomas Wright stood on the stage where Barbara had conducted her show trials. Friends, neighbors, we've been through something terrible together. But we've also learned something important. Community isn't about rules and enforcement. It's about people looking out for each other, supporting each other, standing together against those who abuse power. I propose we completely restructure our HOA with term limits, financial transparency, and independent audits. The vote was unanimous. Standing in my workshop that night, surrounded by 41 years of tools and memories, I understood what Martha would have said about all this. She'd always believed that good people had a responsibility to stand up against bullies, regardless of the cost. Barbara Mitchell had believed her position made her immune to consequences. She'd believed that authority meant the power to hurt people without accountability. And she'd learned, as every tyrant eventually learns, that systems built on fear and corruption always collapse. The engineering was inevitable. The Workshop War. How HOA President Barbara Mitchell learned the mechanics know exactly. How deep corruption goes. Part for the sentencing hearing 6 weeks after the guilty verdicts felt like watching a controlled demolition of Barbara Mitchell's entire existence. Every piece of her carefully constructed empire collapsing in precisely calculated sequence. The same federal courthouse, the same courtroom, but this time the atmosphere carried the weight of finality rather than anticipation. I sat in the front row, surrounded by the same 17 victims who'd testified at trial, all of us waiting to see justice measured in years and accountability. Barbara entered wearing the same orange jumpsuit, but 6 weeks of federal custody had transformed her from defiant tyrant to broken defendant. Her silver hair had gone completely gray at the roots, her face gaunt from institutional food and crushing weight of consequences. Gerald shuffled in behind her, his expensive wardrobe replaced by prison khakis. The confident attorney, now just another white-collar criminal awaiting punishment. Dave Morrison looked like someone who'd already accepted his fate. Judge Patterson entered with the same methodical authority, carrying sentencing guidelines and victim impact statements that would determine 3 lives. Before we proceed with sentencing, Judge Patterson began, his voice carrying 40 years of dispensing justice. I want to address the scope of these crimes. This wasn't simple theft from financial desperation. This was systematic abuse of trusted authority over 6 years, targeting vulnerable community members, corrupting municipal systems, and destroying social fabric. The defendants didn't just steal money, they stole security, peace of mind, and faith in community governance. Mr. Martinez, does the government have sentencing recommendations? Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez stood with files documenting every stolen dollar, every traumatized victim, every corrupted system. Your Honor, the government recommends substantial prison sentences. For Barbara Mitchell, primary architect of this criminal enterprise, we recommend 22 years federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release and full restitution. For Gerald Mitchell, who provided legal cover, 18 years federal prison with restitution. For Dave Morrison, who corrupted his public trust position, 12 years federal prison with permanent disqualification from public employment. The courtroom gasped at the numbers. 22 years would make Barbara 70. Upon release, Gerald would be. These weren't sentences designed for rehabilitation. These were sentences ensuring they'd never hurt another community. The defense attorneys made predictable appeals for leniency. Barbara's attorney painted her as a misguided volunteer. Gerald's attorney emphasized his previously unblemished career. Dave's attorney begged for mercy, but Judge Patterson had read every victim impact statement, reviewed every piece of evidence, and understood exactly what these defendants had done. Mrs. Mitchell, please stand. Barbara rose on trembling legs, her confidence completely shattered. The court has reviewed your case extensively. You held a position of trust and systematically weaponized that trust for personal enrichment. You targeted elderly residents on fixed incomes. You attacked families, maintaining their cultural heritage. You drove people from homes through manufactured crises. You corrupted municipal systems designed to protect citizens. And when confronted with evidence, you escalated to vandalism, threats, and witness intimidation. The sentencing guidelines suggest 80 into 24 years. However, I'm imposing a sentence at the upper end due to aggravating factors: abuse of position, targeting vulnerable victims, extensive duration, and complete lack of remorse. Barbara Michel. You are hereby sentenced to 23 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You will pay full restitution totaling $412,000 to victims and the homeowner association. You are permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. You will surrender all professional licenses. Do you understand this sentence? Barbara's response was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. But as marshals moved to escort her away, something inside her broke completely. "This is insane," she screamed with desperation. "I was protecting our neighborhood. I was maintaining standards. That workshop was an eyesore." He refused to follow simple rules. The courtroom erupted in angry responses from victims. Judge Patterson's gavel came down like thunder. "Mrs. Mitchell, your complete inability to accept responsibility only confirms the appropriateness of this sentence. You had countless opportunities to change course, to acknowledge wrongdoing, to make amends. Instead, you escalated at every turn. Even now, facing 23 years in federal prison, you cannot admit you committed crimes. You still believe you were entitled to steal money, destroy lives, and corrupt systems because of your position. That attitude is precisely why this sentence must be severe." Barbara's final words, as marshals dragged her away, echoed with delusion. "You're all making a mistake. I was the only thing holding this neighborhood together. Without me, everything will fall apart." But her prediction was wrong in every way, as the next 6 months would prove beyond doubt. Gerald's sentencing was equally severe. "Mr. Mitchell, you're an attorney who took an oath to uphold the law. Instead, you created shell companies to launder stolen funds, used your legal expertise to intimidate victims, and corrupted your professional position for enrichment. You betrayed every ethical obligation of your profession. The court sentences you to 19 years federal prison, full restitution, and permanent Your law license is revoked. You will never practice law again." Dave Morrison received 14 years for corrupting municipal code enforcement. You accepted bribes, filed false reports, harassed innocent citizens, and betrayed public trust. Your corruption enabled every crime these co-defendants committed. Walking out of that sentencing hearing into the crisp December afternoon felt like emerging from a long tunnel into daylight. The winter sun sparkled off fresh snow. Mrs. Patterson hugged me with tears of relief. "Bob, I can finally sleep without nightmares. 23 years means she'll be 78 when she gets out. At least I'll know she can never hurt me again." That evening, 47 Riverside Meadows residents packed into the Martinez living room. The atmosphere was completely different from previous emergency meetings. No more fear, no more isolation. Just neighbors who'd survived something terrible and were ready to build something better. Thomas Wright called the meeting to order. "Friends, we've been given a second chance to create the community we always deserved. Our HOA operated under criminal leadership for 6 years. We need to completely rebuild our governance structure. The floor is open for proposals." Jennifer Cole presented comprehensive reform package. First, mandatory term limits. No one serves as president for more than 2 consecutive years. Second, mandatory financial transparency. All HOA bank statements published online monthly. Third, independent annual audits. Fourth, resident approval required for any expenditure over $5,000. Fifth, elimination of violation fines. Instead, community mediation for disputes. Sixth, protection for pre-existing structures. And seventh, mandatory rotation of board positions. The vote was unanimous, but the most important change came from Mrs. Patterson. "I propose we establish the Riverside Meadows Community Protection Fund using the restitution money. Instead of distributing it back to individual victims, we should create a permanent legal defense fund for any resident facing HOA abuse. We'll also establish a scholarship fund for neighborhood kids and an emergency assistance program. Let's turn Barbara's stolen money into something that actually helps our community." The motion passed unanimously with thunderous applause. My workshop became an unexpected symbol of the new Riverside Meadows philosophy. Instead of forcing it to conform to arbitrary standards, The reformed HOA board officially designated it as a community resource center. I started offering free workshops, teaching kids basic engineering, metalworking, and problem-solving skills. Martha would have loved seeing teenagers learning to machine parts on my old lathe, their faces lighting up with wonder. The Martinez family started hosting monthly cultural celebration dinners where residents shared food, music, and traditions. Mrs. Patterson converted her gazebo into a community library with free book exchange and weekly reading groups. Mr. Henderson's Garage Brewery became an official neighborhood gathering spot where residents planned community projects. Tony's hardware store started hosting monthly home improvement workshops. The store's bulletin board transformed from where Barbara posted violation notices into a community connection center where neighbors offered help and built genuine relationships. 6 months after sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through prison mail systems. The return address showed Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, Connecticut, where Barbara was serving her sentence. The letter was written in Barbara's familiar handwriting. Mr. Anderson, I've had 6 months to reflect on everything. My attorney says I should apologize if I want any hope of sentence reduction appeals, but I can't apologize for something I still believe was necessary. Yes, I took money. Yes, I used enforcement selectively. But someone had to maintain standards. Someone had to protect property values from people like you. Your workshop was an eyesore. I was doing what needed to be done, and you destroyed me for it. The irony was stunning. Even after conviction, trial, and severe sentencing, Barbara still couldn't grasp that she'd been the problem rather than the solution. She'd spent 6 months in federal prison and learned nothing about accountability or the difference between leadership and tyranny. I wrote a response I decided not to send. Mrs. Mitchell, leadership isn't about imposing your vision through force. It's about helping people build something together. You didn't protect our community. You terrorized it while stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The fact that you still can't see the difference tells me that 23 years might not be enough. I hope someday you'll genuinely understand, but if not, at least you can't hurt anyone else. Instead of sending it, I framed it next to Martha's favorite photograph in my workshop. She'd always believed forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing first, and Barbara clearly wasn't there yet. 1 year after Barbara's sentencing, Riverside Meadows threw its first annual community festival in the same park where Barbara had once held intimidating HOA meetings. The smell of grilled food mixed with children's laughter and live music. I set up a display showing some of my aerospace projects, explaining to curious neighbors how hydraulic systems I'd designed for Mars rovers could be understood by anyone willing to learn. Kids asked surprisingly sophisticated questions about pressure systems and mechanical advantage. Mrs. Patterson won the Community Service Award for establishing the Legal Defense Fund and Library. The Martinez family received recognition for their cultural celebration dinners. Jennifer Cole was elected HOA president under the new term limit system. Even Tony received an award for turning his hardware store into a genuine community hub. The only person who didn't attend was Barbara Mitchell, currently residing in federal prison cell number 7-2-43, facing another 22 years of consequences. During the festival, a reporter from the local newspaper approached me. "Mr. Anderson, your documentation of HOA fraud helped expose a criminal enterprise and led to substantial prison sentences. What advice would you give other homeowners facing similar situations?" I thought about Martha, about my engineering training, about the 17 victims who'd found courage to testify, about the community we'd rebuilt. "Document everything," I said. "Every violation notice, every threatening interaction, every suspicious financial transaction." Engineers learn that data defeats denial. When you have irrefutable evidence, truth becomes undeniable. But more importantly, find your community. Barbara's power came from isolating victims. When we came together, shared our stories, and realized we'd all suffered under the same systematic abuse, her power evaporated. Criminal enterprises depend on silence. Community depends on communication. Choose communication every single time. The reporter asked one final question. "Do you regret the fight? The legal costs? The stress? the time invested. I looked across the festival at Mrs. Pattison teaching kids about local history, at the Martinez family serving their traditional foods, at Mr. Henderson laughing with friends, at all the faces of people who'd been afraid and were now free. I looked at my workshop, no longer threatened with destruction, but celebrated as a community resource. And I thought about Martha, who'd always believed good people had an obligation to stand up against bullies. "No," I said firmly. "I don't regret it for 1 second. Barbara Mitchell stole 6 years of peace from this neighborhood, but we took back our community, rebuilt it stronger, and ensured she never hurt anyone again. That's not something I regret. That's something I'm proud of." Standing in my workshop that evening, after the festival, surrounded by 43 years of tools and memories and Martha's photograph, I understood something profound. Barbara Mitchell had tried to destroy my sanctuary because it didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Instead, her attack had forced me to document her criminal enterprise, exposing corruption that had poisoned our entire community. Her attempt to destroy my workshop had ultimately saved our neighborhood from her tyranny. The engineering was poetic. She'd built a system dependent on fear, isolation, and unchecked authority. But systems built on those foundations always contain their own failure modes. All they need is someone willing to document the cracks, someone trained to recognize structural weaknesses, someone stubborn enough to fight back regardless of cost. Martha used to say that every problem contained the seeds of its own solution, if you looked carefully enough. Barbara's criminal enterprise had contained the documentation of its own destruction. And when you spend 43 years designing systems that absolutely cannot fail in deep space, you develop very particular skills in systematic analysis. Barbara Mitchell picked a fight with the wrong engineer. She's now serving 23 years in federal prison. Her husband Gerald is serving 19 years with permanent and Dave Morrison is serving 14 years with permanent disqualification from public employment. $347,000 in restitution is being distributed through the Community Protection Fund. The HOA has been completely restructured with term limits, financial transparency, and community oversight. Property values have actually increased, and my workshop, the structure Barbara tried so hard to destroy, now hosts engineering classes for neighborhood kids every Saturday morning. Drop your worst HOA or neighbor nightmare in the comments below. I read every story personally, and some might inspire the next episode. Have you ever faced a corrupt HOA president? What would you have done in my situation? Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. Subscribe to HOA Stories and hit that notification bell for more tales of regular people fighting back against entitled neighbors, corrupt systems, and petty tyrants who believe authority means immunity. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's justice, documentation, and a community finally free to be what it always should have been. We appreciate you spending your time with us on HOA Stories, where karma catches up and documentation defeats denial. If you enjoyed today's journey from workshop threats to federal prison sentences, hit like, comment below, and subscribe. Remember, when someone tries to destroy your life's work, sometimes the best response is systematic documentation and engineering precision. Because tyrants always fall, it's just physics.